Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the defection of Lee Anderson to Reform UK, because there's a lot going on here, but also how this continual psychodrama is distracting us from what should be important political news. Because something's happening today which journalists will not be chasing up because they're distracted by this self-defeating nonsense. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So this was not exactly a surprise. After losing the Tory whip for doing a racism too far, Anderson initially sounded like he would like to find a way back. He said, "Oh yeah, I totally understand why the whip had to be removed from me." He expressed support for Rishi Sunak. He then said that his wording had been a bit clumsy. Sunak in turn made it clear that Anderson did not have the whip removed for what he said, but just for not apologising. So it looked very much like the groundwork was being laid to let him back in. Only Anderson started receiving lots of gammon support for what he said, boosting his ego, including from some Tory MPs, and so felt emboldened to double down, which he duly did. In fact, at his defection press conference today, he even said he was taken aback by the strength of support for what he said, which is an odd thing to say for someone who always insists he's speaking for the silent majority. So after doubling down, it seemed impossible for Anderson to behave himself long enough to regain the whip. Indeed, what was the point? Anderson has zero chance of winning his seat at the election under the Tories, and he's not really a Tory. It's not like he's going to pop up somewhere else later. I mean, he's got zero chance with Reform UK as well. But now I think he's got he'll have an opportunity to move to a different seat, so we won't lose as badly, because in Ashfield, Reform UK are nowhere in Ashfield. He did promise he'd be standing in Ashfield in some form, but that was before he joined Reform UK, and he can always claim Reform UK want him to stand somewhere else. Reform UK have a candidate in Ashfield already, so it's easy to say, oh yeah, I would absolutely have loved to stand there, but unfortunately we've already got a candidate, so it's going to have to be here. He has been known to tell the odd lie before as well anyway. And it's not like Anderson has any party loyalty. So unlike some Tory MPs, he had no reason to commit to the Conservative Party if it wasn't going to do him some personal good. In fact, one of the best takes on the move came from the Lib Dems' Tim Farron, who said, "Yikes, he's been in Labour, Tories, now Reform, it'll be our turn next." And if the Lib Dems can ridicule Anderson, all I can say is he better be careful where he sits on the opposition benches. He won't want to be too near any of those Labour MPs who might sniggle at him. He's very delicate, you know. In fact, the press conference showed how delicate. He looked incredibly awkward. He was visibly irritated by the questions put to him. For someone who reckons he just tells it like it is, he's very thin-skinned when someone does likewise. I know to some he sounds like he's from the north, but he's actually from the Midlands. He wouldn't last 5 minutes in the north, far too highly strung. At the end, when asked about his decision, he said he'd done a lot of soul-searching. Unfortunately, he didn't say whether he'd found one. I would also say, and indeed did say on Twitter, that the defection itself was amateurish as well. And I don't just mean because some turnip put a bloody big flag between the lectern and the cameras, making Anderson look more hapless than usual. It's almost like the flag was his ventriloquist dummy. But you don't defect on a Monday morning. You do it just as PMQs is about to start for maximum impact. You know, you look at the online news outlets, and although he's mentioned, he's there. The articles dominating are Kate's dodgy photo and the Oscars. When Christian Wakeford defected, doing it the right way, just before PMQs, he was top of the news agenda for the rest of the day. And nobody even knew who Wakeford was. Lee Anderson, more of a household name. But then Reform UK have said that they are in advanced talks with 9 more Tory MPs about defecting. Now, this could be rubbish, of course. I would take anything Tice says with a big bucket of salt. But if true, and if advanced talks means imminent, then it could work out very well for Reform and very badly for Sunak. Like, you imagine the scenario. So Anderson defects this morning, starts the ball rolling. Then they get some more meaningful defections on Wednesday. So maybe they pick their best one for just before PMQs on Wednesday, disrupts that. That will have been a decent move. A disastrous move for Sunak, ever making him deputy chair of the party. There have been a lot of comments from Tory MPs today, furious with Sunak for being so naive, saying they told him at the time it was a mistake. Now, obviously, they won't have been able to say so publicly, so we'll take their word for it. But there were people in the media who didn't think it was a mistake. Dan Hodges has been outed again for thinking it was a brilliant move at the time. It was not. But what this defection is another example of just how politically inept Rishi Sunak is. Over a year ago, before he promoted Lee Anderson to deputy chair of the party, Lee Anderson was already certain to lose his seat at the next election. One of these doomed red wall Tory MPs. Anderson was therefore just basically a backbencher with a big mouth who wasn't even a proper Tory, having been a Labour councillor, leaving the party before he was kicked out for racist behaviour. If he'd defected to Reform UK then, would have been a problem. Yeah, surely, absolutely unwelcome, of course. But the problem would have been limited. It would have been a no-hope political opportunist being opportunistic again. The media would have largely reported it in those terms. Lee Anderson, the man who moves from political party to suit his own immediate selfish needs. But now the story is bigger because Sunak made Anderson a senior member of the party. And for what? Anderson has defected now anyway, and it's a bigger story because of what Sunak did. Not a bigger story than dodgy royal photos or who was wearing what at the Oscars, but still. And, you know, for Tory MPs saying things like, they're blaming Sunak, blaming his lack of judgment. I would say, never mind Sunak's lack of judgment. What about his lack of intelligence here? Now, we know he's intelligent in a sense, investment banker. I mean, you know, you don't always have to like the way they make their money, but they have to be intelligent to do it, right? But not very wise. Think about it this way. Rishi Sunak has been played by Lee Anderson. Lee Anderson was made deputy chair, not because Rishi Sunak thought it'd be a great idea. We know this, at the time we thought maybe, but now we know. What happened was, he went to the chief whip and said, Reform UK have offered me a load of money to defect. At which point, oh my God, no, we don't want this. I'll tell you what, we'll make you deputy chair. Now, this won't be true, by the way. No way that Richard Tice or anyone in Reform UK, not that there's many people in Reform UK, would have promised that money, because it would have, I mean, it's very illegal. And it would have been really easy to find the proof of it if anyone suspected it. So I don't believe that is true. I think Lee Anderson made it up, got Rishi Sunak to offer him something, and he offered him a very senior position within the party, raised his profile. He used that raised profile to then get himself on GB News. The GB News job appeared after he became deputy chair. So Lee Anderson has engineered all of this. He's basically, how must Rishi Sunak feel? A man who is intelligent in a sense, he's got a good brain for some things, clearly, and has that sort of arrogance of going to a top public school, where he thinks of people like Lee Anderson, who was on something like 30 grand a year before he became an MP. It's like not even the shit on his shoes. He looks down on people like that. I don't have working class friends. How must he feel knowing he's been played by this oik? But there are other aspects of interest as well. People have been reminding us that Lee Anderson was a strong supporter of automatic recall petitions for any MP who voluntarily changes party. So he was asked if he would be stepping down in order to fight the by-election as a Reform candidate. No, I won't. Elections are terribly expensive, you know. And there might be an election in May, you see. And interesting that the man who thinks spending £1.8 million on each individual asylum seeker that they want to send to Rwanda is a perfectly good use of public money, but having a by-election so that people can be represented by their party of choice is not. Thoughtful to be suddenly concerned with value for public money, isn't it? And just to highlight what a problem for Sunak this is, his opponents within the party have been out in force laying the blame squarely at Sunak's feet. The far right have blamed him for not being crazy enough with his policies. Oh, this is a sign you need to be much crazy with your policies. But then those on the centre-right who backed him are now blaming him for ever giving Neanderthal a prominent platform in the first place. Some of those MPs have expressed outrage that they were made to defend the many of Anderson's brain farts as deputy leader publicly, damaging their own relationship with vaguely normal voters, only for it to now blow up in their faces. Yet Sunak clearly has bigger problems to deal with. There really is a lot about this Anderson defection. I could go on, but there is another sense in which you could say this is trivial nonsense which shouldn't even be happening and is drawing attention from the real event. I saw a report that David Cameron, Anne-Marie Trevelyan and a load of spads went into Downing Street about midday today. This was after the defection news. Now, here's the thing. Reform UK could be lying about having 9 more Tory MPs lined up. Because they've been saying things like this for a long time, and no defect. I mean, Lee Anderson now, only because he was kicked out, right? But let's say they're not lying, and Sunak can't be sure. Let's say they're not lying. That's a huge problem for Sunak. Imagine Reform actually persuading all 9 to defect, their own merry little band of ringwraiths. And then let's say they get them to defect on a strict schedule, one by one, a day or 2 apart, stringing it out over a 2-week period leading up to the Easter recess. I mean, if Sunak calls the election next week, it'll look like he's doing it just before he runs out of MPs. And if he waits until after Easter, he just invites others ousting him before they actually run out of MPs. Cannot emphasise enough just how damaging this would be to Sunak. Surely his top priority is dealing with this and trying to find out what he needs to do to stop it, to stem the tide. But his priority was actually a meeting with the Foreign Secretary, the Minister for the Indo-Pacific, and a load of advisors. Something to do with the India trade deal, perhaps? We don't know. We won't know because journalists are chasing up comments about Lee Anderson, not asking what's going on in Downing Street. And yet this is something Sunak is prioritising over a potentially fatal threat to his leadership. And this is the problem with political circuses. It obscures what's really going on. Because Lee Anderson is way more interesting to discuss than what might be going on in the Pacific. Of course it is. But is it more important? I doubt it. So theatre takes precedence over importance again. And when will it end? Probably never. But reforming our political system will at least stop it happening on this scale. But I must just end by going back to Lee Anderson and presenting what I think was the best take from a very strong field. I thought there were a lot of good takes today. But the best one was Lee Anderson defects from the Conservatives to Reform, a move that has the rare effect of boosting the average IQ of both parties. But there we are. I'll leave it with that. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.